No one expected a 6-year-old prince to become the center of a royal shift this big. But early this morning, the palace quietly confirmed something that insiders have been whispering about for years. A single statement, carefully worded and easy to miss, just rewrote the future of Prince Louis. And once you understand what was really being said, it becomes clear this wasn't a routine update. It was a warning, a correction, and possibly the most important royal decision made in a generation. The announcement didn't come with flashing headlines or dramatic language. It never does. Instead, it arrived the way palace bombshells usually do, wrapped in polite phrasing and subtle implications. The statement acknowledged that discussions have been ongoing about Prince Louis's long-term role, adding that lessons have been learned from recent history and that a new approach would focus on personal development over rigid tradition. To most people, that sounds harmless. But for anyone who understands how the monarchy operates, this was anything but normal. The palace does not comment on the future of young royals unless decisions have already been made. They don't float ideas. They don't test reactions. They confirm outcomes, which means this wasn't a theory or a maybe. This was the palace signaling that Prince Louis's life will not follow the path expected of royal children for centuries. And the reason why takes us straight into one of the most uncomfortable truths about the monarchy: Prince Louis currently sits fifth in line to the throne, behind his grandfather, his father, and his two older siblings. That position may sound secure, even glamorous. In reality, it's one of the most dangerous places a royal can occupy. Too high to live freely, too low to have purpose. Royal watchers have a blunt name for it: the spare's spare. And history shows that this role rarely ends well. Prince George has a future mapped out from birth. He knows what's coming, even if the weight is heavy. Princess Charlotte, thanks to modern succession laws, holds a unique and stable place in royal history. But Louis exists in a gray zone. He's royal enough to be restricted, but not royal enough to be essential. And that contradiction has quietly damaged generations of royals before him. Princess Margaret spent her life trapped between privilege and powerlessness, denied love, denied freedom, and never quite allowed to matter on her own terms. Prince Andrew drifted through adulthood with status but little direction, a mix that later fueled disastrous decisions and controversy. And then there's Prince Harry, whose story still looms over the palace like a caution sign they can't ignore. Harry was born knowing exactly what he wasn't. Not the future king, not the priority, just the backup. For years, he played the role expected of him, the fun one, the disposable one, the one who could be deployed or dismissed depending on optics. According to Harry himself, that lack of identity slowly hollowed him out. His military service gave him meaning, but even that was cut short. His charity work thrived until it didn't fit the hierarchy. And when he finally tried to reshape his role, the system had no space for it. Whether people agree with Harry's choices or not, one thing is hard to dispute: the monarchy didn't know what to do with him. And William watched all of it happen, as future King William understands duty better than anyone. But as a brother, reports suggest he carries private regret, not for what Harry did, but for how little room the institution left him to be anything else. Insiders claim those realizations became impossible to ignore once William had children of his own, especially his youngest. Unlike William, Catherine entered royal life as an outsider. And according to people close to her, that perspective changed everything. She reportedly studied the lives of spare royals across Europe, noting a clear pattern. The ones who thrived were given independence early. The ones who suffered were kept in limbo, never allowed to fully belong anywhere. It's been said that Catherine struggled the most when thinking about Louis's future. George had clarity. Charlotte had history on her side. But Louis had questions and no answers. And waiting, she reportedly believed, would only make things worse. The turning point, according to royal sources, came during private family discussions earlier this year. With health scares bringing mortality into sharp focus, priorities shifted. King Charles, initially cautious about making such decisions so early, was reportedly persuaded that repeating old mistakes wasn't an option. The monarchy had already lost one spare. It couldn't afford another. That brings us back to what the palace confirmed today. Beneath the diplomatic language was a clear message. Prince Louis will not be raised as a future full-time working royal. He will be given the freedom to pursue his own education, interests, and eventually his own career. That single idea represents a radical break from royal tradition. This doesn't mean Louis is being pushed out. He will always be a prince. He will always belong to the family. But unlike spares before him, he won't be molded into a role that doesn't exist. He won't be trained for lifelong duty without purpose. Instead, he'll grow up knowing that his life is his to shape. What that looks like remains intentionally undefined. And that's the point. The palace isn't locking him into military service, ceremonial roles, or symbolic patronages. Reports suggest his education may be more flexible, his public exposure more limited, and his path far less scripted than previous generations. Some insiders have even speculated about non-traditional schooling later on, though that remains unconfirmed, of course. This decision doesn't exist in isolation. It changes the dynamic for the entire Wales family. George will carry responsibility, Louis never will. That contrast could be difficult, but sources say William and Catherine are committed to helping their children understand that different paths don't mean unequal value. One serves through leadership, the other through example. Charlotte, too, benefits from this shift. While she's expected to remain a working royal, the new approach suggests she have more agency than princesses before her. Less pressure to disappear into formality. More space to define herself. Most importantly, confirmation is an institutional admission, even if it's never said out loud. The old model failed. Spare heirs left unsupported don't quietly accept their fate anymore. They fracture families. They damage the crown. And ignoring that reality nearly cost the monarchy everything. Prince Louis represents something new. Not a rebel. Not an escapee. But a middle path. A royal who belongs without being consumed. A prince who can honor tradition without being trapped by it. There will be challenges. The press won't disappear. Scrutiny will follow him no matter what he chooses. Every success will be questioned. Every failure magnified. But unlike those before him, Louis will face that world with something rare in royal history. Permission to choose. Permission to step back. Permission to be more than a backup plan. The truth about Prince Louis's future isn't devastating. It's hopeful. For the first time, the monarchy isn't waiting for damage before changing course. It's acting early, intentionally, humanely, and that may be the most important. Evolution the crown has made in decades. And that evolution doesn't stop with one child. What's unfolding around Prince Louis could quietly reshape how the monarchy survives in a world that no longer accepts tradition without purpose. For decades, the royal system relied on silence and endurance. If a spare struggled, the expectation was simple: cope, comply, or disappear from relevance. That approach worked when public scrutiny was limited and family conflicts stayed hidden behind palace walls. But that world no longer exists. Every emotion is dissected. Every decision is amplified. And every failure becomes global conversation. The palace learned that the hard way. That's why this moment matters more than it appears. Prince Louis isn't being prepared to hold the monarchy together with duty alone. He's being prepared to exist without resentment. And that distinction could determine whether the next generation stays intact or fractures all over again. There's also a quieter motivation at play here. One few commentators say out loud, the monarchy is shrinking. Fewer working royals. Less public tolerance for inherited privilege. More pressure to justify every public expense. By allowing Louis to step outside the traditional structure, the palace isn't weakening itself. It's streamlining, reducing internal strain, avoiding another highly public exit that would drain credibility all over again. Some critics argue this gives Louis an unfair advantage over his siblings. freedom where others have obligation, choice where others have destiny. But insiders suggest William sees it differently. To him, forcing 3 children into identical roles would be the real injustice, especially when history proves that not every royal is built to survive the same mold. And then there's the public perception. For years, younger generations have viewed the monarchy as distant, rigid, and emotionally detached. A prince choosing a profession, living outside the spotlight, earning a life instead of inheriting one. That image could soften attitudes in a way no rebrand ever could. Louis may never wear a crown, but he could quietly become the most relatable royal of his generation. Of course, none of this guarantees happiness. Freedom doesn't erase pressure. Being a prince will always complicate relationships, careers, and privacy. Every friend will be scrutinized, every partner judged, every mistake magnified. But the difference is this: when those moments come, that shift toward putting the person first is something the monarchy has resisted for generations. Not because it didn't understand the damage, but because acknowledging it meant admitting the system itself was flawed. Prince Louis's future suggests that admission has finally happened. What's especially striking is how early this course correction came. In the past, spares weren't addressed until problems became unavoidable. Margaret was already heartbroken. Andrew was already drifting. Harry was already angry. Only then did the palace react, and by then, it was too late. With Louis, the palace didn't wait for resentment to form. It didn't wait for rebellion. It stepped in before identity could fracture. That alone sets this moment apart. There's also a generational undercurrent driving all of this. William and Catherine are raising children in a very different cultural climate than the one William grew up in. Mental health isn't whispered about anymore. Emotional neglect isn't brushed off as tradition. And the idea that children should sacrifice their inner lives for institutional optics doesn't land the way it once did. Reports suggest William is acutely aware that the monarchy won't survive another public implosion like the one involving Harry. Not emotionally. Not reputation ally. So instead of forcing Louis to grow into a role defined by absence, they're giving him definition from the start. That doesn't mean he'll reject royal life. In fact, it could lead to the opposite. People who choose connection freely are often more loyal than those who feel trapped by it. If Louis grows up feeling supported rather than sidelined, he may still champion causes close to the family. He may still represent Britain in meaningful ways. He may still step forward when needed. But the key difference is that those choices would come from agency, not obligation, and that distinction matters more than titles ever could. Some royal historians believe this approach could eventually influence how other non-essential royals are treated going forward. Fewer symbolic roles, more intentional planning, clearer exits that don't require scorched earth departures. If that happens, Prince Louis won't just benefit from change. He'll become the reason for it. Still, not everyone is convinced. Traditionalists argue the monarchy's strength lies in uniformity and sacrifice, that allowing one prince too much freedom risks undermining the discipline that keeps the institution standing. But others counter that rigidity is exactly what caused the last major rupture. And the palace, quietly but clearly, seems to agree with them. What's undeniable is that this decision reframes the meaning of being born royal. For centuries, it meant surrendering choice in exchange for status. For Prince Louis, it may mean something entirely different. Status without suffocation. Heritage without imprisonment. Duty without erasure. As he grows older, people will speculate endlessly about what he'll become. Commentators will try to predict his career. Headlines will chase every interest he shows. But the real story won't be what he chooses. It will be the fact that he gets to choose it all. That freedom doesn't guarantee success. But it guarantees something far more rare in royal history: the chance to fail privately, learn authentically, and succeed on his own terms. And when people look back years from now, they may realize this wasn't just about protecting one child. It was about saving a family from repeating its most painful pattern. about recognizing that loyalty can't be demanded, it has to be earned. Even inside a palace, Prince Louis won't inherit a crown, but he may inherit something far more valuable, a life that belongs to him, and in a family where destiny has always been decided at birth. That quiet gift may prove to be the most powerful legacy of all. That legacy will unfold slowly, almost invisibly, which is exactly how the palace prefers it. There won't be a single moment where the public is told this is the new model. Instead, people will notice it in the gaps, in the expectations that never arrive, in the milestones that look different from the ones before, in a prince who isn't constantly being positioned, polished, or prepared for something he was never meant to inherit. As Louis grows older, those differences will become harder to ignore. While George's path tightens with age, schedules filling up, appearances increasing, responsibilities stacking one on top of another, Louis's path will likely do the opposite. More flexibility, more room to explore, more silence where there would once have been obligation. And that contrast will spark debates whether the palace wants it or not. Some will say it's unfair. Others will say it's overdue. But behind those arguments lies a deeper question the monarchy has been forced to confront. Is tradition meant to preserve people or consume them? For most of its history, the crown chose the latter. Individuals were expected to bend until they fit the shape of the institution, no matter the cost. The ones who couldn't bend quietly were labeled difficult, weak, or disloyal. Prince Louis's future suggests a different philosophy is taking root. One where the institution adapts to the human, not the other way around. There's also something quietly strategic about this decision. A prince with an independent life is harder to weaponize, harder to pit against the heir, harder to turn into a symbol of resentment. The monarchy learned painfully how quickly internal family tension can become an external crisis. Giving Louis's independence isn't just kindness. It's prevention, and prevention matters in an era where every private emotion can become public spectacle, where interviews, documentaries, and memoirs can redefine the crown overnight. William understands that better than anyone alive. He's lived on both sides of it, as the protected heir and as the brother left behind when everything unraveled. That lived experience is shaping how he parents. Not with grand gestures, but with structural safeguards. Clear expectations. Clear freedoms. Clear boundaries. The kind of clarity that spare heirs before Louis never had. One of the most damaging aspects of the old system was uncertainty. Not knowing where you stood. Not knowing what you were allowed to want. Not knowing whether your presence was valued or merely tolerated. Louis is being spared that confusion. From the beginning, he's being told in actions, if not words, that his worth isn't conditional on service. That doesn't mean he'll reject service. In fact, it may make it more meaningful if he chooses it. Service offered freely carries more weight than service extracted by obligation. And that lesson could ripple far beyond one prince. If Louis grows into adulthood grounded, independent, and emotionally intact, he'll become a living counter-argument to the idea that royal relevance requires lifelong sacrifice. He'll prove that connection doesn't disappear when control loosens, that loyalty doesn't evaporate when freedom is granted. There's a quiet irony here. By giving Louis less, the monarchy may actually be giving itself more stability, more authenticity, more credibility with a public increasingly skeptical of inherited power. Of course, the story isn't finished. It hasn't even really begun. Louis is still a child, blissfully unaware of how much symbolism has already been attached to his life. One day he'll learn what was decided for him before he could understand it. And when that day comes, the true success of this decision will depend on how it makes him feel. If he feels trusted rather than managed, supported rather than sidelined, included rather than positioned, then the palace will know it finally broke the cycle that damaged so many before him. Because the greatest risk for spare heirs was never rebellion. It was erosion. The slow loss of self that happens when a life is lived in someone else's shadow with no permission to step into the Light Prince Louis has been given that permission. Early, quietly, deliberately, and years from now, when people look back and ask when the monarchy truly began to change, they may not point to a coronation, a scandal, or a crisis. They may point to the moment a little boy was allowed to grow up free.